Mark Jones has already done more to help and protect Wyoming citizens in his 3 years of lobbying than Marilyn Connolly has done in her 20-plus years as a government insider. Mark was indispensable in helping to pass Wyoming's Second Amendment Protection Act, the banning of red flag gun laws, and the tracking of gun purchases by credit card companies. Mark Jones is already representing you in Cheyenne, so let's send him to do more work for us in the legislature. Vote Mark Jones on August 20th. This ad was paid for by Wyoming Stockmen for Liberty.
If you lie to the government, they'll put you in prison. But when they lie to all of us, it's called being a politician. You think taking guns away will save our kids from the killings, but you're pro-choice, abortion kills way more children. If America's so terrible and racist, it probably isn't safe to encourage immigration. Just saying, all the contradictions are embarrassing. You know who hates America the most? Americans. But we are all the same. We are red, white, and blue. Ashamed to be American? Okay, that's cool. Cause honestly, we are all ashamed of you too.
Y'all are so fake. Oh no, the forecast said that there'd be snowflakes.
And you've waited all week. It's that time once again. Wide Right Turn coming your way. A little pre-election day celebration conversation. I don't know, actually, because Tom Kelly never tells me what we're going to talk about before we talk about it. So let's get into it. Jailbird Joey here, bringing you another exciting episode of Wide Right Turn with Tom Kelly. So let's bring him in and find out what we're going to do today. Mr. Kelly, how you doing, bud?
Doing well, sir. To be fair to me, I quite often don't know what I'm going to talk about until I actually open my mouth. So it's been a blessing and a curse my entire life.
It's one of those therapeutic things we share of, I don't know, there's a lot of stuff in there, a lot of toys in the attic. We're going to knock the dust off one of them and play with it. That's it.
That sounds about right. Well, we're coming up on the end of the primary season in Wyoming. And boy, it's been a humdinger, hasn't it? And at present, when I'm talking right here, I just finished up my last day of campaigning on Saturday. I don't campaign on Sundays. The day right before, I don't know. It just seems like the die's already cast at that point. If anything, you can make some unforced errors. I don't know if I'm going to convert anybody. I doubt the election's going to be decided by 2 or 3 votes. It was all the work coming up to that at that point. So I was done. And then a bunch of fun stuff blew up on the heels of that. Did you see the cease and desist letter from the Wyoming State Republican Party?
I have.
Was that the Gang of 12 or whatever? We just had these people who were feigning like they were speaking for the Republican Party and picking precinct captains. And then I saw that Brian Miller released his list of people that he preferred personally, not as the chairman of the county party, but as a private citizen with Amendment 1 rights and not spending any party funds to post a photograph of a piece of paper he printed out. But, right away, all sorts of fireworks started. It gave me kind of the feeling like I left a party, said goodnight to everybody, like my sign-off from the campaign on Facebook, and then a brawl broke out right after I left. So I'm glad I'm not around for that, because I'm staying off Facebook from that final post to afterwards. But I'd like to share that, Joey. Would you mind humoring me on this? Because it is important that people who have supported me hear this, and that not everybody who listens to the show follows me on my campaign page.
Yeah, no, please, by all means, go ahead and let me know if you need me to look anything up or back you up on anything.
Well, I'm just going to go in this, what I written word for word on Facebook. It was on Saturday. I went up by myself for about 4 hours, hitting neighborhoods, of course, that I hadn't hit yet, and obviously didn't get everything because it is a big district, and you get further and further out from the city center, and it's a longer and longer drive between houses, and you have driveways that within the city limits you can fit 4 houses usually, or 4 different properties. But I got back and I thought it over, and I wrote this. I spent one last afternoon meeting people, and I decided to go it alone today. There was much time for introspection with slower speeds on gravel roads and longer drives between houses. I have one takeaway. I'm grateful. I'm grateful to God for the gifts and challenges He's given me throughout life to make me into who I am today. I'm grateful for my wife and family who give me daily real-world reasons to stay strong in principles and to persevere when I'm tired. I'm grateful for my friends, new and old, who accepted me with my quirks. Specifically speaking, thank you to Mark and Dana Jennings for seeing something in me that I did not. Thank you to Holly Jennings, who helped me jumpstart my campaign and design that cool yard sign for me. Thank you to Mike Arzi, who was part of our merry band of 4, campaigning together and for each other for the last few months. Thank you to Lillian Kelly, my 6-foot-tall little girl, who took on the role of managing my campaign. It's supposed to be too long to thank everyone who helped me by contributing money, organizing events, going door to door for me, driving me around town, putting my signs in your yards, encouraging me, praying for me, and voting for me. All of you know who you are. We all did what we could. We showed up and we did the right thing, and we did it at the right time. It's all anyone could ask. I'm okay with however things turn out on Tuesday. And that's the sincerity of it all. I really am. Win or lose. Looking back at the entire campaign, just the opportunity to do it, that so many people would see me as the best choice to represent an entire legislative district in the state. And the support I got from people, newcomers to Wyoming like myself, relatively speaking, and long-term natives and people who have been here multi-generational, being able to look past that as not being necessarily a liability. It's been a fantastic experience. But I'm going to talk more about some of the nuances of campaigning during the climate that we've seen with this really fun made-for-media split between the Wyoming Caucus and the Wyoming Freedom Caucus, which the Wyoming Caucus seems like they named themselves intentionally so they would be conflated with the Wyoming Freedom Caucus. And it makes me think back to when I was on the air on Sheridan Media with Gail Simmons, and they had the little discussion. Can't call it so much a debate, but the on-air ask the questions and answer. And they asked me to talk about the rift in the Republican Party, the so-called rift, or basically, as I call it, the de facto two-party system, because the Democrats are so weak, so they just started registering as Republicans so they could win office. So I characterized the Freedom Caucus as the grassroots conservatives, the everyday people, the regular guy banding together. Like I said, grassroots conservatives, actual voters, even though it's often been characterized as out-of-state national interest, which is laughable when you look at it. And I characterize the Wyoming caucus as the traditional political insiders, the more moderate, the establishment. And that's how I saw it as a political scientist. Well, lo and behold, the financial campaign reports came out. The campaign finance reports came out. We know what I meant. And what did we find out? We found out that the Wyoming caucus is largely established, connected, rich donors. And the Freedom Caucus was the one that had a greater percentage of its money come from actual Wyoming voters and from a much greater number with much smaller contributions. Not contributions of thousands of dollars, contributions of 100 or less, 50, 10, or I think 20. Didn't memorize looking at it. But that is the data underlying what my observation was just on the surface, and it looks like underneath I was correct. The Wyoming Freedom Caucus is a grassroots conservative movement. And then so what we see now is we're right before Election Day, and I'm seeing absolute panic from the establishment to the point we've got one candidate whose majority of money came from liberal PACs and a handful of actual individuals saying that his opponent shouldn't be allowed to vote because he registered too late. We're trying to disqualify your opponent at the last moment. Like, that even matters. That's a sign of sheer panic. When I see the governor putting together a PAC and dumping tons of money into it and dumping a lot of money in the races, becoming the governor of the state being the number one financial contributor to legislative races, does that not sound like somebody trying to buy a rubber stamp legislature? I don't know how else you see it. I mean, I understand that he has the same rights as all of us, but to back and fund an entire slate of candidates, I mean, there's nothing, you don't even try to make it look like there's something objective about this, or you really truly believe in certain individuals. If you have select candidates who are friends, people you really believe in, by all means, you should be supporting those people. But to pick one ideological slate, not a single person affiliated with in any way, present company included, with the Wyoming Freedom Caucus, was supported or is supported by the governor. How could you look at that any other way than the establishment right now is in full-blown panic mode? What do you think?
Well, I think that it's been problematic since before the reports came out, and all the reports did was give them that last-minute scramble. I think what you're saying is pretty dead on. And we have to remember the position I always come from, and David Iverson and I sometimes get into a back and forth because we're coming at it from different angles. And the angle I always like to come at it from is the angle of my listeners, the voters. What is the end state? You can have all the money in the world, all the degrees in the world, all the experience in the world, but in a campaign, prince or pauper, you're trying to win hearts and minds. You're trying to convince the voters, hopefully, honestly, of who you are, what you plan to do, and how you're going to represent them. Yes, there's other things in there. There's money, there's corruption, there's special interests, there's all this other stuff, which tend to be the angles other people argue from. But I'm looking at it from the reason I did Who Are You with every candidate interview, real basic, was for the uninformed, low information, or frustrated and given up on it voter. You got to connect with people where they're at. That is the prize. So, yeah, some of these things we're seeing at the last minute. First of all, I don't know what their machine is about, but it obviously isn't about optics, because once it comes to light, and they got to know what the Independence Network around, it's going to come to light. It doesn't look good, even without our commentary, plus the facts and data that we back it up with. When these reports came out, everybody looked at the pack and, oh, okay, well, Governor Gordon's trying to buy the legislature. Well, for me, it goes beyond that. That's pretty obvious that he went and got a bunch of out-of-state East Coast dark money, which is something they rail against in their establishment letter and their website. We don't want any of these outside influences, but that's all it is. Through our governor, who constantly talks about decorum and civility and disagreeing better and respecting the genteel nature and traditions of our positions and we serve, and then goes and violates that principle that he says he has by doing this. But the biggest lie was, none of these are endorsements. Nobody's getting money from us. This is about making sure people aren't being lied to and giving you the resources to check on, well, what the Independence Network does, the facts and data. Here's the contact information for these candidates. Everybody knew, because he didn't put out a full list of candidates. He put out his cherry-picked, anointed successors to the throne in any given district. All it did was confirm that these people got massive amounts of money for being Governor Gordon's appointed, anointed, whatever group. The other problem I have is you got to do a little extra homework. But if you look at all of the PAC money recipients and endorsed candidates, the ones that are not incumbents, but are running against either an incumbent who voted for the special session, or they're not in the seat, but their challenger also isn't in the seat, a vacated seat race where the challenger is part of the conservative movement and has stated publicly they would have voted for the special session, Governor Gordon and his wife separately gave those candidates even more money. And then when you look at the PAC list, every incumbent on that list, with the exception of John Conrad, was a sitting legislator that voted against the special session. So this comes full circle to, not only is it everything you said, trying to buy the legislature, it also looks very much like payoffs for making sure House Bill 125, the Prime Act, and the Regulation of Abortions Act could get vetoed by the calendaring and then not have a special session to come back and fight the governor's vetoes. This whole thing was a setup since before the session took place. I have an interview with Landon Brown where he said we were less than 2 days into the session and there was already talk on both sides of having a special session. Well, normally that doesn't happen if you don't know how the votes are going to come out and that they're going to get vetoed. Some of these bills passed with a 2/3 or greater majority. One of them passed with a 3/4 majority vote, still got vetoed. If there's that much support for a policy in both chambers, there should be no talk about special session that early before those votes even happen. It should be, hey, we're going to get this done. Look how well we're all getting along. We finally found something to agree on. We're going to do it, and we're going to do it fast, and the governor's going to be about it, and Wyoming's going to find something to come. No, it was a setup, and now we're seeing the payoffs. Every dime and dollar from the PAC and that came out of Governor Gordon and his wife's pocket personally were payoffs to make sure we did not have the special session and his vetoes were going to stand, period.
My biggest concern, personally, is that there's a chance I win this, that I get the Republican nomination, no one runs against me in the general election, and I become a legislator down in Cheyenne. Somebody who is expected to work with the governor and work with the people he funded against me and my friends. How in the world do we actually discuss issues and talk about stuff when we walk in here and the general attitude will be like, you weren't supposed to be here. You weren't one of the chosen ones. This is kind of like the way the establishment nationally reacted to Donald Trump when in 2016. It's like, no, this wasn't supposed to happen at all. No, we had it all set up who was supposed to be in charge. And then they immediately started fabricating stuff against him. I get concerned about stuff like that. When I hear that message left for Chuck Gray and the stunning silence from people down in Cheyenne against that type of language and action, is that definitively how we're going to be treated when we're there? Now, I actually have to make it through the primary first, and I can analyze it as a political scientist when it's over. I can't analyze it yet because the votes haven't been counted yet, and we've talked about this. My face is right up in it, so I can't see the forest through the big tree right in front of my nose at this point. But I don't understand how in any way we could take it seriously that they want, to people to come together, to work together, move the state forward. All I hear is we need to squash the grassroots conservative movement. We need to shut up those crazy right-winger America Wyoming firsters, and we have to move Wyoming forward into the national and international system of corporatism and big business. And that's ultimately what groups like Americans for Prosperity are about, kowtowing to these international corporations because, well, they make money. I mean, and who cares about things like silly little things like property rights? If there are minerals to be got under somebody's farm, forget the farm. We're about prosperity. We're not about rights. We're not about liberty. We're just about getting stinking rich and making politicians stinking rich to help make us stinking rich. But the problem with that is your average everyday voter gets left behind in that. Thus, the rise of populism in America. When the Republican Party at the national level got hijacked by the AFP movement, this whole thing that the industrial military complex of getting rich off wars, off making, off passing minimum wage laws to squeeze little businesses out of business because they can't compete with the mega corporations. When we have all these rules, regulations, and laws that stack things in the favor of companies like Google and Amazon and Microsoft and Apple, that is no way to live in a free society. I get concerned when we start tooling our education system towards becoming a good worker, being trained to take orders, to get in your little, I can't even call it in your cubicle anymore because so many people will be working from home at this point. And that's my greatest fear from Wyoming right now. And it's something I brought up years ago, that this is more than just right versus left, Democrat versus Republican. As you see that we have a huge swath of the Republican Party now has given into the whole idea of moving forward in our democracy, prosperity and commerce. What was that latest bill we got here? Let's turn Wyoming into a nuclear waste dump because, hell, they'll pay us a lot of money to do it. Prosperity. Our dollar bills would glow green, but that's great. That no problem whatsoever. So that's back to my original concern. Is there any working with anybody who's associated with the Wyoming caucus? Because I can tell you right now, when I see Ogden Driscoll troll me on Facebook when I'm not even a candidate, I'm just make a comment about Slagle running for re-election. And he comes back at me, blasting me about my character. And, of course, we talked about this before. I thought it was a parody site because the writing was like a fourth grader. But then I see Chuck Gray he publishes that voicemail. I believe the comment was deleted, and I'm sorry I didn't take a screenshot of it because I didn't think twice about it. I just rolled my eyes and I thought, there he goes again, the Senate president. When Cowboy State Daily put that article on Facebook, Driscoll commented that he thought the thing might be staged, that Chuck Gray's just doing this for attention or whatever. It looked fishy to him, however he had said it at that time. How am I supposed to work with somebody in the Senate? I know I'd be in the House, but, there are two chambers in the legislature, and there are conference bills, and there is communication, or at least supposed to be, outside of the chambers to talk about how to get things done. How do you communicate with somebody like that before even meeting me? You're associated with the Freedom Caucus. You're worthless. I'm going to try and assassinate your character preemptively. Apparently, he knew something I didn't. My name must have been getting thrown around down in Cheyenne as a possible candidate at some point, because that's the only reason I could think why somebody down there would target a nobody like me. But there's a good chance that I'll be down there, and I'll have to work with them. You've been down there watching that. What do you see? What are the dynamics you see between those in the Freedom Caucus, those associated with the Freedom Caucus, and those in the, I can't even call them the Wyoming caucus. I mean, that's just calling them the round circle. The Liberal caucus.
Well, your first question, how do you operate in that atmosphere? My answer is, you're talking to a guy that's thrived in austere environments his whole life. I got thrust into war for years. It's one of the reasons I'm so abrasive. I have almost zero time or tolerance for bullshit. You're either going to play the game by the rules, or you're going to get the hell out of my way. I don't need anybody. I really don't. This is also why I wouldn't join a caucus. But you go in there and you realize you're in a hostile battlefield. Even if you have friends, it could be issue by issue, policy by policy. Your deck of cards, your group of friends could change very quickly. So when you go in there, realize you were elected for a specific thing, and that was to represent your district, and they believed in you with what you said. So you take those principles you ran on and you cling to them, and even with your friends. In fact, it takes more courage to argue with your friends on principle than it does to defend yourself or attack your enemy with your principles. So you go in with that posture of, I know who I am. I'm not going to be arrogant about it, but it's always going to be, hey guys, you know who I am. You know that we have to find a way to word this, support this, debate this, that meets the principles that I ran on. Otherwise, I'm not serving my people. They didn't tell me what I have to do, but I told them what I would do, and they say, yes, we'll vote for that. The other thing you do is you go in and you look for not the old guard, that sounds like the establishment, but the crusty veterans, the guys that were in there that when there was only 6 and 8 conservatives, because they've had it worse than you ever will. And this is funny because I had this conversation with Mark Jennings a few weeks ago of, people like Lori Bratton who are coming in having the same concerns that you're showing us now. And yeah, it's going to be tough, but it's nothing compared to what it was 8-10 years ago. And that's part of the job. I don't compare my war to what the guys in Vietnam did or World War II. I just appreciate, hey, you guys paved a lot of this road for us, but time for me to get to work and do some of this hard work myself. You're going in there to fight. You're going in there to represent and defend people's ideals, principles, and liberty. None of that's supposed to be easy. I don't want it to be an echo chamber down there. I hope there's a little pushback. Maybe not as much as you're concerned about seeing, but I think you'll be okay. I think there are ways to do it. And I think that, to answer your second question, the main difference I see between the redcoats, who are politicians, and the conservatives, who are mostly representatives, you got a spectrum amongst both of them, but the redcoats, they're entitled. They believe they know what's best. They look down their nose at the people they supposedly serve, and they have an agenda, and it has nothing to do with improving Wyoming, improving the lives of the people of Wyoming, protecting, expanding liberty, or maintaining a small, functional, and responsible government, which is what conservatism's about. A lot of the conservatives, I don't say all because I've seen a few, that if I say you have an ego problem, you have a big problem because I'm telling you you have an ego problem. So some of you, But, and we'll probably see this if we get enough of the majority to secure a couple more leadership positions, maybe the Speaker of the House position. What you're going to see is a dedication to the proper process. And I don't mean following the rules. And I don't mean making sure that everything's conservative. I mean the proper process of enforcing the will of the majority while defending the voice of the minority. You are not going to see a Speaker Chip Nyman treat the House the same way double O dumbass Albert Summers did. And I hope I'm right. I don't see it happening. I see a very fair playing field, no stacked committees, no kill committees or taking bills and shoving them in drawers. Everything's going to get its proper consideration, because if the conservatives take over leadership positions or start taking over majorities and become retributive, then they're just as bad, if not worse, than the people you're concerned about having to work with already. But that's the difference I see, and I hope that that's a reality. Knowing some of these people the way I do, it's unfortunate, but that's why there's so much vitriol and such a big divide. It's not because the conservatives are so bad. It's because the redcoats have been losing yard by yard, inch by inch, game by game, that they're doing what you're talking about. They're flipping out. They're losing it. This is why you keep hearing it escalate, not just in this election, over the last 4 legislative sessions. Things have gotten progressively worse, but it hasn't been the bad acts of the conservatives. I think we have people in there that want to govern. They want to be statesmen. They want to debate. And, some of them aren't perfect, but a majority of them don't want to flip the switch and say, we're in control now. Time to make you suffer. It's going to take a change, that leadership change, to really see that clearly. Everybody expects it to be black and white one day after another, but it's all going to be based on what happens by the time this airs. What happens tomorrow, these primary elections are going to be huge. And you're also going to have to see the victory laps or the complaints that come after certain candidates lose. That's going to be the telltale sign of really who is where. And I like your Facebook post that you put out. It's very reminiscent of what I did my very last week of my campaign in 2020. I sent out a mailer and a big Facebook ad. Then it was a lot simpler than yours, but it said, win or lose, I thank you all for the opportunity to serve and represent you with or without the title in the future. And that's a job that I dedicated myself to. And I think I fulfilled that job, not just because I was the chairman of the county party, but because I did the work. I continued to produce more tangible results that aligned with the interests of the people by listening to the people, whether I was a legislator or not. And I think that job is something that you'll continue to do. But we're going to see over this next week who wins, who loses, how do they react, what do they accuse people of, what investigations or complaints they send to the Secretary of State's or the Sheriff's Office, what really comes down with the money. Oh, man, there's some people that haven't even filed their reports yet, and they're late, and that's a problem. But the big difference, I really think it is going to be how you act, the posture you take, the principles you apply when you're in what they're calling a position of power, leadership, but it's actually a position of responsibility. And I think the conservatives see that service and responsibility over power and title better than the redcoats. And hopefully, after tomorrow, we'll have a pretty good idea of who's in the chute to take and either prove that or disprove that. I'm willing to be wrong. I just don't want to be.
Well, I don't want anyone to get the wrong idea. I wouldn't be walking down there naively thinking that I'm going to be some type of, Deadpool Marvel Jesus coming in there to save the conservative movement or anything like that. What I'm looking at really is, let's put it this way. I've heard the arguments that, I just don't understand how things work in Wyoming. I'm originally from Chicago. Wyoming is classic Chicago school politics of connected people and businesses, about people speaking out of both sides of their mouths, telling the voters how conservative they are while stabbing them in the back with policy. We saw this all the time in Illinois. Same thing, Democratic Party though instead of the Republican Party. You had people getting elected as Democrats telling the most hardcore leftists how liberal they were, and then they would go in there and govern conservatively from whatever. I understand the whole game of trying to fool voters, trying to wear this mask of being a public servant to enrich yourself. And I understand why people will spend $80,000 to get a job that doesn't even pay that in 2 years. It has to do with the fact that they want the connections and the power and the money that comes from the coffee pots and the just disappears in the cracks of the budget into nonprofits and connected developers. We see it at the county level. We see it at the city level. We see it at the state level. I understand completely how those politics work. What I'm really saying is when I ask, how can I work with those people? It's more of a statement. I can't work with people who are duplicitous. I can't trust what they say. I can't have an honest conversation with them because the entire time I've been campaigning or doing interviews or talking to voters, you don't meet different versions of me. Oh, you might meet one version of me unshaved with my hair down, and you might see me all slicked back, clean shaven in a tie, but the same words will be flying out of my mouth because I don't have like a professional or politician persona to fool the voters and then behind their backs say something else. I'm not worried about a hot mic catching me. At worst, they'll hear me say some more colorful language and F-bombs, but I'll be saying the same messages and making the same points that I typically do in public. So I'm really hoping for a grassroots conservative shellacking of the left here. Because I would love to see conservatives with the reins of power just to do what you said, to actually lead and serve the way a representative republic is supposed to be, versus trying to snow the voters so you can continue funding your special interests so you could buy a bigger ranch for your family that's been here forever. I understand the fear. I understand the fear of losing that power because it's not just losing that lucrative scheme of swindling voters and taking in all that money, and at the same time, it's never enough for some reason, so we have to do something else to diversify our revenues. Well, I could rant about that forever. I actually want to shift gears here because I'm thinking about, when we talk about the conservatives in the Republican Party and the farther right members of the Republican Party, unequivocally stated, we don't have a conservative and far right wing of the party. We have a liberal wing and a conservative wing of the party. Full stop, right there. If this wasn't Wyoming, we would have a legislature that was split about 50-50. If you look at where people stand on issues. Listen to this. I read this in WyoFile today. And this comes from a liberal Republican in the Sheridan area, Kim Love. I'm going to read excerpts from his column talking about, the Freedom Caucus. Well, the typical caricature of the Freedom Caucus. Quote, "Our challenge as conservatives is to intelligently adapt to a changing world while conserving what is worth conserving. I wasn't born in Wyoming, but I made it my home for over half a century, and I want to intelligently conserve the good things that have kept me in Wyoming for all my adult life. Short-sighted, rigid opposition to change isn't the way to do it. Thoughtful adaptability is. An example of rigid short-sightedness, the legislature recently decided to defund diversity at the University of Wyoming. I'm guessing a lot of the Freedom Caucus refugees who have recently moved here from other states aren't aware of the Black 14 incident in the late 60s that crippled the University of Wyoming football program for decades. Recruiting the caliber of players that can enable Wyoming to field a competitive football team is a challenge under the best of circumstances. Does the Freedom Caucus really think the university can effectively recruit a talented roster of players while being aggressively hostile to diversity? In case the Freedom Caucus hasn't noticed, the University of Wyoming football team couldn't even come close to being competitive without its current diverse roster. Before the legislature gets too aggressive in purging UW of diversity efforts, it might want to check out the diversity inclusivity statement on the athletics website. Quote within a quote, "The University of Wyoming Athletic Department is committed to diversity and inclusion to achieve and sustain excellence," it reads. "We believe we can promote excellence by recruiting and retaining diverse student athletes, coaches, and staff, and by creating a respectful climate that supports their industry." Is the athletics program going to be the next one on the legislative chopping block? I can't wait to see how that plays out. Abortion is another favorite of the Freedom Caucus. Members argue having one of the nation's most restrictive abortion policies is a good idea for Wyoming. Their rigid and short-sighted efforts ignore the fact that the abortion issue doesn't exist in a vacuum. Wyoming is one of the worst states in the country in terms of providing OB/GYN services. Believe it or not, such services depend on being able to attract OB/GYN doctors to the state. Think about that for a second, Joey. I don't need to go any further with this. Conservatives who support diversity, equity, and inclusion, conservatives that support abortion. No, that's what liberals support. Now, I do not argue here with Kim Love's arguments about the importance of diversity and inclusion or the importance of a woman's right to have abortion. I disagree with him on those policy positions, and I could pick those apart really quickly and show him why he's wrong. What I need to get at here and disagree with is the idea that he's conservative. You're not. You're liberal. Liberals promote diversity and affirmative action and inclusion policies. And when we defund something like the diversity department at the university, it's not because we don't want a good football team. It's not, if you haven't noticed, members of the Freedom Caucus aren't all the same color or sex either. It's because these are Marxist policies of pushing outcomes over equal opportunity. If we had a true DEI football team, we'd have somebody on the team who's in a wheelchair. We'd have a blind person. We'd have somebody like my son who has Down syndrome maybe, because we'd have to include everybody regardless of the excellence of their talent. The whole idea of recruiting excellence is in direct contrast to the idea of intentionally seeking diversity. A football team should be recruiting the best players, even if the team is 100% black, even if it's 100% Filipino, even if it's, we can't say 100% white. Somebody will run with that quote and say something that's completely out of character. And then the idea that abortion somehow could ever, that pro-life policies are rigid, unbending thinking on abortion, that somehow we can make a conservative case for infanticide. That is, the crux right there, that we are our own God. The idea of abortion being healthcare, like having a mole removed. It's not a human being. The woman temporarily has two brains in her body at that point. Or the idea that, let's go a little bit further, that euthanasia, people who are just a big drain on our democracy because, they don't produce anymore and they have high health care bills. Maybe it's time to put them out of their misery. That's where those ideas lead. And there are, believe it or not, there are conservative and libertarian atheists out there. But I've never met a conservative who thought abortion was a good idea. And it's not a matter, he's saying the conservatives have to change with the times. He's not saying that. He's making an argument that we have to abandon conservative principles and become liberal. That's the whole idea of moving forward. But I don't see it as moving forward. Any country that's ever adopted these principles actually ends up moving backwards in terms of prosperity. But I digress there. But I have no issue with going down and working with people who see the world differently than I do. Like I just said there, I'm not telling Mr. Love he's wrong on his positions. I'm just saying he's wrong to characterize them as conservative. They're not. They're absolutely not. He just said there, goes, no, really, I'm telling you, a triangle could have four sides. No, it can't. But, I won't argue whether a triangle is better than a square, but you can't tell me that the four-sided figure is a triangle. That's what you're doing here when you're telling me that DEI and pro-choice are conservative. I will have an easier time if I make it down there speaking with and talking about being able to get votes together probably with the members of the Democratic caucus than I will with the Liberal caucus.
Oh, always easier. I'm telling you. I don't know how many times we've said it before on the program or on the network here, but I have a better relationship. I can get along better with Chris Rothfuss and Mike Yin than I can with half of the quote unquote Republicans, especially in the House. It's weird, but it's because of what you said. There's personality, which their personalities aren't. In fact, Chris Rothfuss's procedural posture is impeccable. He's a tough guy to debate in a room where he knows the rules because he knows them very well. But ideologically, and we also, like you said, can't make up the definitions of words. I would love to sit down with Kim Love and ask him the same questions I asked every candidate, including you, starting with, what does it mean to you to be a Republican? And what is your definition of conservatism? And then based on your definition, now I can debate you because I know where your foxhole's at. I get where you're fighting from. But I think you're correct. He's fundamentally wrong. And this is based on, it's a term I coined a while ago. I haven't pushed it that much, but it's what I call nostalgic conservatives. They're conservatives or Republicans because their grandpa was a Republican or their family's always been Republican or they remember fondly the years of Reagan and how great everything was when everything in the 80s actually was teetering on a razor's edge and pretty bad. But, everyone was high on cocaine and getting rich off junk bonds. So, of course, they remember the 80s fondly. Anyway, I want the answers to the fundamental questions. What do you believe it is? And I've said it on my show and all my interviews. There's no right or wrong answer. I just need to know your answer. Then we can go forward. Because you're right. The fundamental concepts, this is why I have a problem with the people that argue that the platform is just a list of goals or guidelines or they need to change with the living generation. Well, this is why we separated principles into the platform and timely position statements into resolutions. Some of these things are true conservative constitutional principles, like life, liberty, the right to bear arms, the right to own, use, and profit from your property. The expectation that the government should have a very specific role. These are foundational. And when you get away from those, saying times are a-changin', well, Kim Love, my question for you, not knowing your answer of what a conservative is in here, if times are a-changin', then how come the Constitution ain't a-changin'? Because that's where really a lot of the core conservative principles come from. So if you believe times are changing enough, I don't know. I'm not a fan of the Convention of States idea, but get behind calling a Convention of States or start putting forth some constitutional amendments. Because the biggest problem I see, top to bottom, from Congress in D.C. all the way through our governor, into our legislature, down to the town councils is nobody knows the Constitution, but they cite it. They don't quote it. They cite it. They say, well, the Constitution says this thing I just made up. They don't live it. They're not willing to defend or die for it. I am. And they skew it or lie about it to fit their current aims. You know how many programs in the state of Wyoming, taxpayer-funded programs run by the executive branch, are absolutely either violations of the Constitution in their existence and their funding, or not recognized in the Constitution as a legitimate function of government or enumerated power of the government. So this is what I argue when I deal with people like Kim Love of, okay, so you're anti-Constitution. It's ridiculous the way they're arguing it. And as far as DEI and the football team and the athletics department being on the chopping block next, well, if DEI actually existed in the athletics department, we would not have a 37% white football team. We would have a 33% white football team. We'd have a 33% Hispanic football team and a 33% African. Actually, no, they'd all be a quarter because I forgot about the Asians. There's so many slices of the pie. If they're really diverse and inclusive, like you said, and within each of those major chunks of the pie, they would have to have one of everything. They'd have to have a transgender. They'd have to have a Jewish kid. They'd have to have a Catholic. They'd have to have a handicap. And if Kim Love's argument is correct, he's actually arguing against something he thinks he's arguing for. He believes he's arguing in support of African-American football players having opportunity. They have the majority of the opportunity now because a lot of them are better football players. So all you're going to do is right the ship the wrong way if you get your way. And as far as the athletics department being the next legislative item on the chopping block, that's been one of my priority items on the chopping block for years. And of course, nobody's listened to my arguments on this, but highest paid public employee in the state is a football coach, makes 6 times what our governor makes. We have hundreds of millions of dollars a year, not only in direct budget going to the athletics department, but also special line items in the budget for matching funds for whatever they raise. It's totally subsidized, nostalgic entertainment that has nothing to do with education. If the athletics department, everyone, oh, but that's our football team. Okay, well, first of all, they suck. They have always sucked. They've got 2 decades of barely having 500 seasons. A couple times they've gotten a little better, but they go to bowl games. Yeah, but they have now invented 700 bowl games. So there's actually only 2 teams in the world that don't go to a bowl game. So don't give me that bullshit. If you love the UW football team or UW athletics or the basketball team down there in the Dome of Doom or whatever the hell they call that ugly ass building, fund it yourself. Go to all the games. Be a booster. Why is it costing us $500 million a year to have kids play games so old people can go and cheer? So Kim Love's not wrong. A few more of my buddies get into the legislature, they're going to hear it. I'm going to pour it in their ear. I'm going to bring them the data. Because definitely not the athletics department or the existence of college athletics, but the subsidizing of this goofy ass BS game for kids who couldn't get into school otherwise and get carried through school. Believe me, I went to the University of Wyoming. I see the garden path that these athletes get walked down. We're going to stop the money. If you're that popular and you're that important, Wyoming citizens will come and watch your game and pay for it. Sorry about that. I got off on a little rant, but he's not wrong. Athletics is definitely in my field of vision here on my radar.
Now, my field of radar, if I get there, is to actually have a balanced budget that is based on curbing extraneous spending, not looking for ways to diversify revenue necessarily. But there'll be many things to work on if I happen to make it down there. My takeaway from the whole thing, though, is when I look at the state of the race, is what I've gotten from voters and the people who've supported me. Now, there are a branch of people who want to, they see it, get something done. And they've kind of purchased the media narrative that moving Wyoming forward and doing all the great things to bring us jobs and education and healthcare and all the things Democrats typically promise everybody. The darn Freedom Caucus got in the way because they're so worried about the inclusive books in the library, and they're so worried about genitals, and it's really that weird caricature of those people who want to actually abide by the Constitution and those who want to maximize freedom for the people living in Wyoming and maximize their own incomes rather than being dependent on the state, that they're the bad guys. And those people are not going to vote for me. I get that, because that's not what I stand for. I'm not out there promising all the wonderful things the state is going to do for you if you just give up some freedom and money to it. I'm not out there promising everybody that I'm going to go back down there and compete with all the other counties and bring back a boatload of money for our county while everybody else can eat cake. That I've been campaigning that I want to represent those voices that think government is out of control and people want to return to a time where we made our own decisions. We don't have things such as, well, we don't care if it's experimental. You better get this, or put that thing on your face because, other people don't feel safe, or you can't carry your Second Amendment protection in here because other people don't feel safe. There's no right to feel safe. The overall feeling I got, and some just outright told me this, they are terrified for the future of the United States as a viable republic. And it's not because of the fighting so much. It's because of the growing swath of the populace that has lost faith in liberty. They want security. They want government to make them feel safe. I want to be safe from disease. I want to be safe from guns. I want to be safe from immigrants. Whatever it is, please, government, take over and make me feel safe. And what you had mentioned yourself about football actually ties in with this, because why does the state have to do it? Can't the people of Wyoming make something happen if we want to make it happen? It goes back to that argument about when Joe Biden was going to cut off the lunch money from our state if we didn't let boys in the girls' bathroom. And the state's initial reaction is like, well, we need the money. And then finally they decided, the public uproar is like, are you kidding me? Are you telling me the people of Wyoming will let our children go hungry if the federal government isn't giving us money? And then other people are like, well, where's the state going to come up with the money? Who said the state had to come up with it? Nobody's going to let children starve in Wyoming. So this idea that if the state doesn't do it, it's not going to happen is a horrible, horrible mindset to have to continue to be in a free country. Unfortunately, we have about 20 out of 50 states right now that have already jettisoned the idea that it's better to live free and dangerously than it is to live unfree and dangerously. Because you can't be unfree and secure. That's not the world. You are either free and in danger or you are unfree and in danger. The government won't keep you safe. The governments across throughout history have been the number one mass murderer in not in U.S. history, but in world history. Of course, even our American government has been known for massive slaughters against natives, horrific experiments against blacks. I don't understand why so many people believe that it'll be different this time if the right people get in power. So going back to what you were saying, Joey, I hope the conservatives, if we get the levers of power, realize who we're working for and don't forget it. And don't get power drunk. And don't get in these pissing matches of power, because I'm seeing this already with the nasty letters going around and with the nasty mailers going around and the threats of lawsuits and actual lawsuits being filed, that the primary hasn't even happened yet and the bickering's already started about who's going to win, who's going to lose. And I get it. When there's a changing of the guard, this always happens. Those people losing power don't want to give it up, and they're not going to go quietly into the night. That's going to happen. But maybe if the conservatives are blessed to be able to have the reins of power, that we will actually stay true to these principles, stay humble, and realize that we're not kings, that we're not smarter than everybody else. We're just the people who were actually dumb enough to get into this arena.
Truer words were never spoken. Well, that's going to bring us pretty close to the end here with Wide Right Turn today. And if you want an example of what Tom was talking about with government's going to save us, government's going to take care of this, government's going to take care of that, jump in your car, get on I-25 and head south to Denver. When you get towards the middle of town, make that wide right turn off the highway and go over to the zoo and head on over to the lion's den. And look at that lion in the cage and realize, wow, that lion's got free food, free health care, lifelong security, and is never going to have anything to worry about. Look how miserable and ready to die he is. And then jump on a plane, head on over to Africa and take a safari and go look at lions out in the wild and ask yourself, do you want that cage? Do you want to pay for that cage? Do you want to give up the opportunity to still have a rough life that requires a lot of you with freedom, or do you want to live in that cage? It's up to you. And if you want to talk more about it, keep an eye out over the next couple of weeks. You'll see me and Tom out there, regardless of the outcome of the primary elections. And when you see us, stop, say hi, and remember, we're not from the government, but we are here to help.
If you lie to the government, they'll put you in prison. But when they lie to all of us, it's called being a politician. You think taking guns away will save our kids from the killings, but you're pro-choice. Abortion kills way more children. If America's so terrible and racist, it probably isn't safe to encourage immigration. Just saying, all the contradictions are embarrassing. You know who hates America the most? Americans. But we are all the same. We are red, white, and blue. Ashamed to be American? Okay, that's cool. Because honestly, we are all ashamed of you too.
Are you looking for a dedicated and experienced leader to represent your voice in the Wyoming State Senate?
I take a man's money. I ride for the brand.
Then look no further than our candidate, Keith Kennedy. Keith is committed to serving the people of Wyoming with integrity and dedication. He will fight for life, property rights, and religious freedom, and work to promote a better future for Wyoming. Kennedy believes in upholding the constitutions of the United States and the state of Wyoming, and in defending the rights of all citizens.
I got nothing but respect for an honest cowhand.
He will work to address the state's most pressing issues, including property tax reform, parental rights, education, and public safety. Join Keith in his mission to make a difference in Wyoming. Vote for Keith Kennedy for State Senate District 10 on August 20th, and let's work together for a brighter future. To join us in our cause, visit us at www.kennedyforwyoming.com.
Oh, you got a choice. Tell me something. Where do you stand? You riding for the brand running scared.
Paid for by Kennedy for Wyoming.